My name is Joan Webster-Vore. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, and went to school at the University of Iowa and fell in love with Iowa and lived in Iowa for over 50 years. Um, 2 years ago, we packed everything up and moved to Boise, Idaho. And that's been a real change in my, because I'm a Midwestern artist. I draw from the landscape and get a lot of inspiration off the corn and the rolling landscape and the things about the Midwest. Uh, I've fallen in love with, but now I'm every time we've traveled, I've always embraced the landscape of wherever I've been. So it's not a huge transition to go to Boise on that sense, but it's learning. Now I'm in a new learning mode of an arid climate, which is really surprising because I do a lot of watercolor studies and it dries my paint faster. So that's been a real eye-opening experience. And looking at the foothills and the mountains, and that's very different. Um, so there you have that kind of background. I lived across the road from a cornfield for 40 years, and that definitely affected my sensibility. Fiber arts specifically, I went to the University of Iowa and have my BFA with my emphasis in drawing. And I would walk by in my undergraduate studies, I would walk by this building and inside you could see into the windows down below. And I'd see all these looms and people were weaving. And I was very intrigued by seeing all of that. And it piqued my curiosity. So my senior year, I took a fiber class and the weaving classes were full. So they call it forms and fiber. And it opened up my whole world, that one class. And I fell in love with fiber. And I really loved soft sculpture. I like working with soft materials three-dimensionally. And it just seemed a natural fit for me. I could take my drawing into it. I could take my painting into it and work with materials. And I always loved sewing, and because I think of sewing as a mark like drawing. So that was that was really exciting. And so then I graduated and thought about that class. And a year later, I decided to go into the program. And the woman Naomi Shadle, um, she was just a wonderful mentor to me. And I learned so much from her. And she made me think about the art world, the fiber world, a lot in a much bigger sense, I think, than I had been looking at it. It's very eye-opening. It's all in the water. The piece behind me is inspired by water, and I I love to sit outside, and this is something I've done for over 30 years, maybe 35, 40 years. I do small watercolor studies of the water, and I'm intrigued by the surface of the water. And how ephemeral it is, how constantly changing it is. And as I'm painting, I think about what's under the water, what's making it the colors and the shapes. And there's the sky, it's the sun, and it's reflecting from above, and you get the blue, you get the trees that are surrounding whatever body of water, unless it's the ocean. But you get there's so much information, and it's changing every nanosecond. So you're just trying to capture this essence of water, the movement, the depth, the reflection, the absorption. So water inspires me, but also the landscape. And I'm very much interested in the environment, and that also plays a big impact on all of things I think about as I'm making things. Freedom. It's a chance to communicate, to tell a story, to make things, to do things with my hand, to solve problems. It's a lot of things. I mean, I think artists are problem solvers. You get an idea, I mean, for me, I get an idea and I try to figure out how to execute it, how to show what I'm thinking about. And one idea leads to another. And I don't know, it's just who I am. I've always made stuff. I come from a family of makers. Yeah. Well, it kind of depends on what I'm doing. But I have a wonderful studio. The two important things I have in my studio are a large white wall to work off of and a grid structure that hangs from the ceiling. I have grids so I can work and hang things because I do a lot of like this piece behind me is hanging and this piece beside me hangs. They I've got to have a structure to work from to build them, to build those pieces. Um, because I think in terms of depth and 3 dimension. It's, it's not, I might have a flat surface, but I'm thinking about what's behind the surface, what shadows I'm creating and what movement I'm creating. So again, I need a rack and a large white wall. And then I'm pretty happy. I mean, I need scissors and paint and other, other things, but space wise, I need that. Sometimes I think it would have been helpful to be an engineer to solve some of these things. That's probably one of my biggest things is I get these ideas and I think of how do I exhibit them to show what my thought was. With target practice, um, I knew I wanted to do a study of the passenger pigeon. And are you familiar with the passenger pigeon? Okay, because a lot of people aren't. The last passenger pigeon went extinct in 1914 on September 1st in the Cincinnati Zoo. Martha, the last known passenger pigeon, died. And it's very odd at 2:30 in the afternoon. It's very odd that we know that the exact day a species went extinct. That's a really curious thing. But the passenger pigeon numbered 3 to 5 billion. And Audubon, James Audubon, documented that number somewhere in that range. They'd fly overhead in these huge flocks and darken the sky, change the temperature from the downdraft of the birds. And people thought it was the Armageddon or the end of days. They were scared because they didn't know what was happening, this mass migration of birds. I learned about them and I started reading about them and I became so curious. And there's a lot of folklore that goes with them as well. But anyway, I started studying them and I knew, well, I had a space, I was going to have an exhibition. I knew I wanted to do something about the passenger pigeon. And so I also knew nearby the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, Iowa was very close to where I lived. I taught there for a while. I knew they had a male and female passenger pigeon in their collection. So I contacted them and I was able to go in and do a series of drawings or in small watercolors of the passenger pigeon. And they pulled them out of the display case and they let me, I mean, they moved them for me. They'd lay them this way and then they'd flip them over. And I got to look at them in the display, paint them, and then out of the display, paint them. And I did that I went 2 or 3 times and painted them. And then I came back to my studio and I was looking at the paintings. And ideas are funny things. Sometimes they come really slow and you feel like you're knocking your head against a wall to get where you want to be. But target practice, I looked at those watercolors and in a flash, I saw the whole piece in my head. So I knew I wanted to do a bullseye on their breasts. And I knew I wanted multiples of them. Then going back to your original question about how do you put the structure, then I had to just play with how they were going to be put up, how they were going to be arranged, how was I going to get the effect of what I wanted to project with these bullseyes. And I started looking around. I love to go to hardware stores and different places and even in office stores. They have so many funny little things like the little clips that are on there. I saw those little silver clips and I thought that's perfect. I can hang them on a brad and I can clip them to them. And it just seemed to fall in place. But that particular piece, it really was sort of an instant of seeing it and figuring it out. Other pieces, like the piece behind me, I spent weeks or months painting and sewing and gluing and trying to figure out what I was doing with that piece. It was a slower process. Definitely. I did for a while there, I did a lot of things that I stitched and stuffed. I mean, fiber art. Over time, I think my work has become more mixed media. Um, I incorporate anything as far as I'm concerned is in my palette. The world is my palette. Whether I pick up a stick, I have sticks in this piece, I have screen in this piece, I have paper in this piece, I have thread, I have wire. And so I really don't think of myself so much as a fiber artist, more mixed media. And there was a time where I was really a fiber artist, but I think I found a place where I can incorporate my drawing and painting background as well as my textile background. Um, yeah, and definitely, I used to just collect fabric and try to figure out how to make three-dimensional structures out of it. But now I work a lot with hanging and threads and yeah. Oh, that that's a really huge question and it changes every time. Um, right now I'm in the Clear Lake Art Center in Clear Lake, Iowa, and I have an exhibition here. And I some of these pieces in here, I thought about them 10 years ago, but I didn't make them until 2 months ago. So when you're making something, there's the thought process, there's the experimentation. Since I'm doing mixed media, I'm not working in one thing. If I were every day drawing or painting in oil or acrylic or watercolor, I wouldn't have these same sort of issues. But the fact that I consider anything that I see or pick up could be a material I might potentially use. Um, that that changes that time frame because I might find something interesting and put it aside. Like I have things in my studio that I think someday I'm going to use this piece or this material, but I've had them for years. So to think about the idea, but then when I have an idea of what I want to do, then I get a little bit more systematic about it. Um, but it builds up. So it's kind of a fluid thing and changing. I can, one example would be years ago, I did this series series of small vessels. They're about this big each, and I had like 20 of them. And it involved paint and cardboard and drawing, and I made these little vessels, and they were very specific shape. And I was very enamored with them, but I couldn't figure out how to display them. And so, I was overwhelmed. So I just put them away. But I had spent, probably a couple weeks making these things and didn't know what to do. And then maybe a year later, I looked at a stick, I think, and I thought I could hang him from that stick and that would work. And in 5 minutes, or well, maybe an hour, I had the piece up and it was like magic because I didn't remember all the belaboring of the first part. It was like, poof, I have this piece. So time's sort of a strange thing. And when you're immersed in making things, I don't think about time. I just work. Probably myself getting in the way. Knowing biggest challenge. I make a lot of things that are really labor intensive. And my probably biggest challenge is how do I engineer them to be labor intensive, but simple to install? Because that becomes an issue of finding a space that will let you put up what you want and give you the time to install it. That's a gift. That doesn't happen that easily. I feel very fortunate to be in the space I'm in right now. Now back to this piece that you really can't see that well, but that I spent a day building that structure, and I had the piece was made. Excuse me, but to hang it versus the screen behind me, I could hang that really fast. So, but when you have all these threads that I'm trying to point to them, I guess all these threads that go up and down, they can tangle. So you have to be very organized and systematic on how you do it all and how you build it. And I think of it as a three-dimensional painting because the pieces are painted differently, each one individually, and they're shaped differently. So. Okay. Well, it came, as I said before, in kind of a flash. So I saw this. The passenger pigeon went extinct over 100 years ago, and they went extinct for several reasons. One is loss of habitat, but a big one is overhunting. And so there'd be 50 of them in a tree, and they do things like set the tree on fire, or they'd shoot them, or they did. It was a massive. Humanity played a big role in their demise, and the idea of shooting them and putting a bullseye because they were a target. And they used them for sport. Young kids would learn how to shoot because they were easy prey, and they didn't necessarily eat them at the beginning. Towards the end, they became a delicacy because things as westward expansion happened, they were losing their habitat. There was also the railroad was moving across. People could get to the west easier, so there was just less space for them. And then the telegraph. Back then the passenger pigeons flew in like a 7-year cycle because wherever they went, people had a love-hate relationship with them because they'd fly into town and they might eat all the crops. On the other hand, they might there's a population where their crops had failed and they flew into town and they saved everybody's life because they had a food source. But it was always a big event when they came, and it was a big deal. And because they went more on a 7-year cycle, people never knew where they were, and they didn't have cell phones, and there was no way of communicating. They knew that they were out there somewhere. So when they started to disappear, people didn't even realize they were disappearing because it wasn't like the robin announcing spring is here and it shows up, or other markers of the changing seasons. These birds flew all over, and they were beautiful birds. They were bigger than your regular pigeon. They could fly 70 miles an hour. They're just amazing. But they flew en masse, so they were an easy target because they were all together. They could easily get them. But they between the train and the telegraph, they could tell people, oh, the passenger pigeons are here. And the hunters, it became an industry. The hunters would show up because they knew where to go. Before that, they just taking guesses of where to go, but suddenly they could be organized in their hunting, so they could really go after them. And then the refrigerated car came into being, so they could put them in the train and send them to the cities, and they wouldn't spoil. But and then New York City became enamored with passenger pigeons, pigeon pot pie, or different kinds of. It became a delicacy. There was a big demand for it, so it became a source of revenue. But as many things happen when you have something that people really like, it can be overdone, and it was overdone, and they perished. Yeah. So the doing the multiples with a bullseye seemed like a logical place to go. And it's a simple looking piece, all these prints, but the fact is I printed them very carefully and very specifically. And I only have so many prints of them. I can't duplicate it without starting the piece over. I mean, they have to be all the same color. They have to be that matching of the male and female. So. Oh, it's exciting. I was thrilled to be invited to participate. I sent in images of my work, and I have spent so much time thinking about birds and flight and in my environmental work. And I've done this large installation of the passenger pigeon that's it's like 18 feet big, long, and 8 feet wide. So I've been working on this study, and to have an opportunity to put this piece out there, I was very excited. It means a lot. That's a really good question. Okay, and here's in the fiber world, there's been discussion: is paper fiber? I mean, that's one question there, but I think it is. In theory, it's not a quilt, but because it's got the repetition of the rectangles, they're not squares, but that you've got a pattern. And I guess the question is what is a quilt? Is I've seen people do quilts they think of it as the quilting work when you're stitching through and up and down. But they might be doing one big picture, and it might not be the blocks. I mean, is the quilt, by definition, is it a block, or is it a process? I think my piece fits in terms of the block, the repetition. I mean, that's where I would put it. But it is a question, and it's something I wondered when they accepted it. I had to stop and think about it. Yeah. So. I hope they'll be curious about the passenger pigeon, and they'll do their own personal research, because once you start digging, it's like eating popcorn. You can't stop, because they go, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And I guess I hope they take away a reverence for how much it's all about balance. Survival of a species. We're facing a lot of species that are endangered or extinct. The passenger pigeon, to me, is really unique because it was native to North America. It was a quarter of our bird population. And yet, when I started doing these pieces, I found out that most people had never heard about them. And they were more, since I'm a Midwest artist, they weren't on the West Coast. They were more flew around, let's say, Missouri, Mississippi River to the East Coast. And then they'd go up to Canada and down to the Gulf. They were more in that region. So going into your museum, there'd be probably less people that would have heard of them, just because they were not native to the area of the western United States. But the fact that there were 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons, and overnight they seemed to vanish. And when they discovered they were disappearing, they tried to, because they could breed them in captivity. They tried to collect flocks to breed, but it was too late. And part of that was, again, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the kind of communication where you would realize things are disappearing. It was somewhere else. You just thought they were somewhere else. You didn't think they were really gone. But so they weren't able to breed them in captivity, and they were able to capture 2. And they were in the Cincinnati Zoo for years. And they named him George and Martha Washington. And they never reproduced. And George died. And then Martha sat there for years, all by herself, years. And then one day she died. And that was, again, 2:30 on September 1st, 1914, a species disappeared. And so I guess I hope people take away a reverence to how fragile our ecology is. And the birds are, the birds in the coal mine. I mean, the birds tell a story. So, yeah. Just know you can make something from anything. I mean, I you don't have to have lots of expensive equipment. You just have to have your hands and your mind and an idea. And the other part of it is you can have a good idea or a great idea, but if you don't do anything with it, it's an idea. But just to dig in and start, and don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to fail. Um, I can't tell you how many pieces I've done over and over again to get it where I wanted to be. A lot of the creative process takes reflective thought. Again, back to the idea, if you have a great idea, if you don't do anything with it, it doesn't go anywhere. But a lot of it just takes time, and you got to let things percolate, and you just have to start making things and looking at them and exploring, and it feels good to use your hands and your mind and try to make something. And don't worry if you don't like it or you don't think. I mean, just do it.